So while we were dithering about trying to figure everything out as far as all our highly skilled technical background here, you were asking me about what kind of tools do you need in order to really be successful. I mean, the most important tool is not something in the outside world. It's going to be inside your own head. So the most important tool is that knowledge. And there are, you can buy different softwares, and especially if you're starting to really want to look at lots of very specific, intricate things that are not necessarily accessible online. But the website, this Astrodienst, which is ASTRODIENST, or astro.com is the address for it. They have free horoscopes, and actually when we get to that point where you're going to be looking at that, I'll take you through how to get into the extended chart selection, which is where you can get it to set up any kind of chart you want.
Okay. And
so there's all kinds of different things to choose from that are more than sufficient.
Okay.
And you can put 100 charts in your free account. So I use it a lot myself. That's what I primarily use when I'm working with people now. And it started when I was traveling a lot, because it's so easy to access it anywhere you go. I don't have to carry my software with me. I didn't even have to take my computer with me, because I could access it before cell phones. I could access it anywhere I was visiting and just pull up people's charts that way. And that just worked a lot better, because then all my files were in one place. So that's what I generally tend to use. And
okay. Yeah, I'd love to see what that looks like at a later date.
Yeah, we definitely will do that. And we'll do that pretty soon, because as soon as you have the basics, then we'll go looking at charts using the basics. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to continue to study the meanings of the signs as far as their basic characteristics. But I want to show you what the astrological symbols look like, so that you can recognize them when you're looking at a chart. Because when people look at this big wheel with these weird symbols and numbers, it just looks completely confusing and complicated, and you can't make any sense of it. So we're going to learn how to look at those symbols so that you can recognize them and read them, and then it'll all make lots of sense.
Perfect.
So I am going to share my screen so that you can see the symbols. Now, this is just the Wikipedia page for astrological symbols.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see now. Okay, so here you should be able to see this pretty soon.
Okay, I'll let you know when I can see it.
There we go. Okay, so what I'm showing you right now, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the part of the Wikipedia page that has the astrological signs. So right up at the very top, it says Aries, the meaning is the ram, the symbol is the ram. The image, that's the astrological symbol. And they list emojis. So it's important to get to know the symbol, because they get stylized a little bit. And sometimes, because they're drawn slightly differently in different places, they can be a little bit difficult to recognize, especially some of the more complex ones like Capricorn. Though it's good here, if you get down to Capricorn, which is almost down at the bottom, you can see there's two symbols.
Yeah.
Now that's actually the same symbol. It's just stylized differently.
Are these pretty standard that you would see?
Yeah. The only thing that you might see, I can see with Scorpio that there's an arrow at the end of the M, because Virgo and Scorpio, and they're right in the middle section, they're both two different M's. And I really want to start with Aries, but the two M's, that's M for matter. That's what that symbolizes. And Virgo and Scorpio are almost two opposite approaches to matter. So with Virgo, it's the Virgin, and she's kind of covering her private parts. That's what it symbolizes. The arm is there. It's protective matter.
Yeah.
Whereas Scorpio, the scorpion and Scorpio, every sign corresponds to a different part of the body, which we should go through that today since I brought it up. But Scorpio has to do with the genitals.
Okay.
And with the eliminative organs, so that that's bowels and bladder and the reproductive organs. So that's the scorpion. So that's also a phallic symbol, but it's also matter externalizing or expressing itself. So we have sort of the virgin, and then we have Scorpio being the non-virgin, the sexualized energy. So let's go up to the top and look at the physical symbol and then relate it to what we already know about those signs.
Okay.
So right at the top we have Aries, and that's the ram. So obviously that symbol kind of looks like a ram with its horns. But the other thing about the signs is that they correspond to the time of year that the sun is in that sign in the northern hemisphere. Now, it's interesting because someone's born in the southern hemisphere, they're not going to be born in that same season. So I'm born in Aries in the southern hemisphere. Most people born in Aries in the north, well, everybody born in Aries in the northern hemisphere is born in the springtime, just after the spring equinox. I was born in the fall. And my ex and I actually used to have a funny little riddle, and he would say, my wife is 6 months younger than me and we're born in the same season. How is that possible?
Wait, so can you explain that one more time? So that's very complex. So the northern
in the northern hemisphere. Well,
right?
okay. So right now, as you and I are talking, it's the middle of February, and we are living in the northern hemisphere, and it's snow all around us. But in Australia, in the southern hemisphere, it's blazing hot.
Right.
We are in the winter now. In the southern hemisphere, it's always the opposite season.
Okay.
So we have winter, they have summer. So when I was born in the southern hemisphere in Aries, which in the northern hemisphere is the beginning of spring, in the southern hemisphere was the opposite season, so it was the beginning of fall.
Right.
What's interesting is some astrologers think that I should be a Libra because I'm born in the southern hemisphere in the fall. But when you actually look at the characteristics of the individual, the astrology still holds true no matter which part of the world you were born in. My sense of the reason for that is that the majority of human beings live in the northern hemisphere. So we're really looking at something that is an expression of almost a mass mind experience. So the northern hemisphere rules will apply to astrology no matter where you're born. Other things like planting seeds and growing things, you got to follow the rules of the hemisphere you're living in.
So even if you're southern, so even if you're born in the southern, what you're saying is the rules of the northern hemisphere will still apply.
They'll still apply to the underlying meaning of that sign. So an Aries born in the southern hemisphere in the fall is still going to have that spring-like quality to them, even though they're born when it's autumn around them.
Okay.
So a reason I brought up there's two reasons I brought up the time of year. One is understanding what's going on in nature in the northern hemisphere at that time of year is another clue to the expression of that sign. So what's happening in nature and when the sun is in Aries in the northern hemisphere is that it's the first time that the days are longer than the nights. And it's when there's suddenly so much more solar energy coming into the world and everything's coming to life. So even though this symbol is the ram's horns, it's also a symbol of life sprouting up out of the ground. So if we go back to Aries is cardinal fire. And fire is the life force. And here's that life force sprouting out in the very first time of the year when we've got more sun than darkness. And that's a really deep comprehension of what that sign is about. Is that energetic, forceful, enthusiastic, exuberant expression of spring. That's an element of what Aries is about. And so when I look at the Aries sign, yes, I know it's the ram, but it feels to me like it's that spring. and you can think of it as little piece of grass and plants coming up out of the ground, as well as the animals moving forward, like the ram. Everything's wanting to forge out into life now because it's now the beginning of spring. So the second one is Taurus. Now that's one symbol for Taurus that is when it's the ball, which would be the bull's head, and then the horns that come up and curl. But the original traditional symbol, which you'll also see, is very simple. It's just a circle with a crescent moon up on top of it, of just a simple C shape. It's not drawn like a moon phase symbol. It's just a C lying on its side, sitting on top of a ball. And they're in the astrological symbols for planets or signs. There are a lot of basic symbols that show up again and again. One is the crescent moon, and the other is the ball. And the ball has to do with this sort of this sense of identity being there. The crescent is spirit. So there's this, Taurus is, I am here I am. Aries is saying, here I am, wow. And Taurus said, yeah, I'm here, I am me. And yet there's this underlying sense of some sort of spiritual principle up above me, and I'm calmly sitting there holding it. So that's what that visual symbol represents. And when we get into Taurus, we're getting into the fixed earth. So now spring's really underway, and we're starting, things are very much alive, and we're stabilizing the earth experience. So we've planted all the seeds. They're starting to develop. Lots of animals are in their breeding seasons, and actually there's a lot of I guess anthropological or archaeological evidence that in the northern hemisphere this actually was the human breeding season once upon a time. Was when the sun was in Taurus. And 9 months later, the sun would be in Aquarius, which is the sign of man, humanity. That's when people often got born. That's way, way back. And I don't know if it was always, I think we had a larger breeding season then, but I think we always kind of just, didn't have one specific time of year. But there's a tendency for this to be the time that's romantic. And even as the sun increases in the northern hemisphere, it actually, the more sun there is more sunlight there is in the day, the more testosterone there is in our systems, particularly men, of course, because they're predominant, that's the predominant hormone for them. So that's another thing. It's waking up that breeding principle.
Okay.
So that's the bull. The bull is going to inseminate the cow. So there's an element of this is about love, fertility, all the rest at that time of year.
Okay.
So just to remember that the symbols sometimes are slightly differ with this Taurus. The old traditional symbol is just that half moon C on its side up on top of the ball. The one with the curly horns, I guess it makes it look more like a bull. It's a little more artistic, so that's fine. Gemini symbol, we're at the twins, and that's obviously that symbol represents the twins. There's two principles. That's also a symbol that is related in some ways to the Tree of Life, the Kabbalah, which is a foundational spiritual symbol that exists in Judaism, but through Christianity and throughout a lot of the Western Hemisphere as well. There's this concept of the polarity of life, and it's symbolized by these two pillars side by side. So these are the two pillars of the Tree of Life joined together. That's the more esoteric symbol of Gemini. And it's obviously on a more mundane level, it's the twins. There they are. They got born together. They have a deeper bond with each other than they do with any other person or being in the world because they shared the womb. So that's where the symbol for the twins. Now this particular symbol, it's slightly stylized again because the top line and the bottom line are a little bit curving. The most traditional symbol, they don't curve. They're just straight lines. So,
What are the two principles you're talking about, or do we get into that a little bit more?
So the two principles are male and female. Okay. That's all forms of polarity that work together. So male and female is one form of polarity. The pillars are in traditional Kabbalism, they are the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity. So it's the principle of grace and expansion, the principle of divine abundance, of the pure principle that gives to us. And it's also the principle of restriction, of ending things, of cutting things away, discipline. So one says yes, one says no, but they are important principles that work together. And one of the reasons we're looking at the polarity of these two principles is we're getting closer to the summer solstice. So the sun is in Gemini. During the time the sun is in Gemini in the northern hemisphere, the days are getting longer and longer and longer until we get to the longest day of the year. So that's when you get to the longest day of the year, that's an extreme polarity for the year. The other extreme pole is the winter solstice, when the days are the shortest they're going to be and the nights are the longest. And when we think of the polarity of light and darkness, we've got these opposing principles: light and darkness, male and female, mercy and severity, yes and no. So that's esoterically. So these specific astrological principles or symbols really speak about some of the enduring spiritual principles of life. So they're very simple, but they have very distinct meanings.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. That was good. So next one is Cancer. And Cancer, and this is another one because it's on the other side of the summer solstice. Again, we've got polarity, because you could look at that as a symbol of the crab. And it's so interesting. Each of these, they have their simplistic image, and then they have their mystical meaning. So if we go back, we just got Aries the ram, but then we've got life sprouting up. We've got Taurus, there's a bull, nice little round bull face and then the horns on his head, but there's the deeper symbol of what that means. We've got the twins together, but then there's the bigger principle, polarity. So when you look at Cancer, you could look at this as a stylized crab. It's kind of round like the crab shell, and it's sort of got its two claws have been symbolized.
Looking like the yin yang, or is that just
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that's the more mystical meaning of what that symbol is about. So yeah, it's the yin yang, and again, because we're on the other side of the summer solstice, again we're dealing with polarity, but we're dealing with polarity in a different way, because if we go back to Gemini, Gemini is mutable air. So Gemini is the openness to intelligent truth. So the Gemini symbol is very left brain. It's a very logical symbol of polarity. Well, we have two poles and they're joined together and they're perfectly balanced. It's very intellectual. The Cancer symbol is much more artistic. It's more feeling oriented. It's flowing, and it's flowing more like the right brain. So it's a yin yang. It's a yin yang symbol, which is more like the yin yang symbol itself comes from the Eastern Hemisphere. And Eastern spiritual traditions tend to be more intuitive, and Western spiritual traditions tend to be more logical. So we have the tree of life symbol, which is a core of one core symbol in the Western spiritual traditions of the two pillars of the temple. That's what the Gemini symbol represents. And then if we look at the Cancer symbol, we're looking at one specific symbol of Eastern spirituality, which is the yin yang symbol.
So when we're talking about polarity, I just think about having like almost like different personalities or different sides. Is that kind of what we're talking about with each of these two in particular? Because both of them have that kind of piece to them, or is that, I don't know how to explain my question, but really.
Yeah. Well, with Gemini, yes, we are talking about that. Although I don't really like the conventional coffee table idea that Geminis are two people.
Right.
They're not.
Yeah.
But the sun in Gemini does have challenges or issues around the two different parts of the self, because one part tends to be more developed than the other. And other planets in Gemini will often have two poles to them. Not every planet in Gemini does that, but that can occur.
Okay. And then the Cancer one, it has the polarity again, but it's not the same type of polarity, really? Or
no, it's not. It's not. And even if you look at the yin yang symbol, in its full form has a dark and a light and a male and a female, but there's a little piece of each other inside of them. So the masculine one is white and it has a little black center in it. showing that it has the feminine within it. And the feminine center is symbol is black, and it has a little white symbol inside it, showing that it has the masculine principle inside of it. So this is showing that the Gemini symbol says there are two poles. The Cancer symbol says there are two poles, but they are united with one another. They flow together, and they each contain the other. Okay. So there's more of a sense of experience to that. And as we now reached, when Cancer begins, we've reached the longest day of the year, and now the days are getting shorter. So now there's this sense of having had a certain amount of experience that is felt. So in the Gemini symbol, we've got mutable air. So the mind is just expansive and thinking of things logically and intellectually. We get to Cancer, we're in a water sign, so it's a very emotional understanding of this. So it's a much more intuitive understanding of polarity, and it's also more emotionally flowing and reactive to experiences. It's a cardinal sign again. So we're now in the time when summer's reached its peak, and it's now going to be getting cooler. So there's a little bit of a sense, especially in this emotional, intuitive side, that survival is no longer so guaranteed. Throughout the spring, everything's expanding and growing, and by the time we get to Gemini, we have the luxury of being purely intellectual. Get into Cancer, it's getting darker every day. And Cancer is a cardinal water sign. It's emotionally goal-oriented. Emotional reactions are geared towards survival because the days are shortening. And so there's this spiritual understanding that all of these cycles are united to one another. There's perpetual growth and development, and that's the healthy understanding of things. But it can fall into the fearful understanding, which is right now, yes, there's those wonderful cycles, but what about the survival right now? So that's one facet of the polarity in Cancer. Trusting the flow versus getting emotionally caught up in the flow, and is it taking me in the wrong direction, and getting involved in the fear. But also looking at other people that are vulnerable to these kinds of changes. So Cancer is a very protective sign. It will often want to reach out and nurture what is more vulnerable as the darkness is coming, is growing. So then we go to Leo, next sign. Now, Leo is, there's a little ball, not a big ball like Taurus, but a little ball. And then from that ball, there's this loop of energy that loops up and around and then curls out in the other way. And this can be looked at as either the lion's mane or the lion's tail. And on an esoteric level, that the ball represents the life force that is, and again, we're always dealing with life force with fire signs anyway, because we're back into a fire sign. The life force extending itself, but it's also extending itself and wrapping itself around all in a sort of fluid way. It's wrapping itself all around the container in which you find the symbol. So even if it isn't sitting in a little box like it is in this picture, in this graph, we always have a certain framework within which a symbol is being imagined. We're imagining it's being based. So we're imagining we've only got so much room on the page to write the symbol. The symbol is actually taking up a lot of the space. And so it's coming from the ball on the left, which is, the left always represents the automatic part of us, the subconscious. So there's life automatically there for Leo. Fixed fire, there is this feeling that there's a constant contact with the enduring principle of life. So Leo actually answers Cancer's question. Cancer's saying, it's getting dark, are we going to survive? Leo says, I'll make sure we do, little girl. I've got this ball of fire here, and I'll never let go of it. I'm completely linked to it. And then from that fire, I'm going to wrap my lariat around and be very, it curls in another direction. So I'll do whatever's necessary to take care of everything. Because I'm stable, fixed fire, I'll make sure everything's okay. That's what Leo says. And at that time of year, even though the days are getting shorter, it's actually the solar effect in the world is being felt the most. That's often when the days are the hottest.
Warm, yeah.
So Leo has a reason to feel like everything's really going to be fine. But they know that Leo knows, this principle of the sign knows that, yeah, things are getting darker, and I've got enough power and strength to make sure everything's going to be okay, despite the fact that things are getting darker. Okay, so the next symbol, Virgo, we talked about the M for matter, and that you could see that's the Virgin protecting herself with her arm, guarding her virtue. It's also, again, a bit of a conservative protection of the material world, because we're now in an earth sign. It's mutable earth. So once again, we know the days are getting shorter, and that means that the physical world is aware of its vulnerabilities. So Virgo is going to come along after Leo's done his big parade. Virgo's going to come along and clean up the rest and make sure it's really all taken care of in all the little fine details. Because Leo makes sure the big picture is taken care of. Virgo looks after all the rest, metaphorically. So she protects matter. Which matter, the word matter is also, it can also be spelled with one T, which represents, or which means mother. The matter, Mother Earth. So Virgo is, even though she's the Virgin, she is also taking care of and acting on behalf of the Divine Mother that makes sure this physical reality is safe, this physical reality is healthy and taken care of. And all the details of this physical world, which is really important as we head into the fall, are taken care of. Yeah, so then we have Libra. Now Libra starts at the very beginning of fall, so the fall equinox. And that symbol actually looks quite a bit like a sunset.
Oh, yeah.
And this is kind of a reminder that the time of day and the time of year are related to one another. So every day when the sun sets on a symbolic, metaphoric level is very similar to the autumn equinox. Just like when the sun rises, that's the whole beginning of the day. The spring equinox is the beginning of the year on a astronomical level, when everything is coming to life. So this is saying that we've come to the conclusion of a cycle, but there's always a warmth to a sunset. There's always this feeling of contentment and beauty. And the same thing happens in the autumn. So there's also these, again, we've got a polarity happening because there's a line at the bottom. And then there's the line at the top that's kind of encompassing that sunset, that's that sense of harvest and completion. And you can also, again, on a more mundane level, look at this symbol as again, a very stylized symbol for the scales, because the scales are the symbol for Libra, or a scale here is what they say in this diagram. Usually Libra is called the scales. And there's an understanding of how the higher philosophical principles and the practical reality are meant to fit together. So this is why we have a sun, a stylized sun symbol joining the upper line, or being made part of the upper line, and then the lower line is just the ground. Here's the ground floor. So Libra it's a cardinal air sign. So it's goal-oriented, intellectual, goal-oriented, social. So Libra is really the sign of the ideal society. That's one of the things that Libra is about. And what is a more ideal time of year than the beautiful warm autumn when there's endless food, we've harvested everything we need, we don't have to really work that much anymore. Maybe sometimes we're gently going in and harvesting a few more things, bringing in some stuff, or bringing in some grapes to make some wine. But it's at that point in time you can imagine an ideal world.
Mm-hmm.
And the sign Libra is very much about that sense of imagining an ideal world or enforcing an ideal world because of the scales of justice. There's for better or worse, there's an idealism in that way to Libra. And when I say for better or worse, I mean that sometimes this concept of enforcing an ideal reality can be taken to the wrong extreme. Again, the person gets an idea that this is the ideal reality, and it may just be their idea, and it may not be bring happiness to others, or ultimately be the best thing for the world. But overall, it is it is a positive urge. It is a positive impulse.
Mm-hmm. So the polarity is just really the fact that the lines can come together, or?
Well, it's kind of spirit and matter.
Okay.
But it's also because Libra is traditionally such a relationship-oriented sign. It's the sign of marriage. It's another indication of the polarity of male and female. And because Libra begins at the fall equinox, the days and nights are equal. Now in Aries, the days and nights are equal, but because it's springtime, Aries just wants to get going, and he's not even thinking about whether the days and nights are equal. But in a sense, metaphorically, the soul has passed through these 6 months and it's gotten into Libra. It's had a lot of experience. So it's starting to think about what's outside of itself more. So there is more capable of seeing the days and nights are equal. We have a polarity of male and female. And the polarity of male and female comes together. The polarity of individual and society comes together to make an ideal world. So then we move to Scorpio. We're getting into fixed water. And now we've got, although it was sort of idealistically being ignored in Libra, although because there's this desire to enforce an ideal society, there is an awareness that now the days are shorter than the nights. Once we get to the fall equinox and head into Libra, the days are getting shorter than the nights. When you get into Scorpio, it's really noticeable. Now we're into the dark, dark part of the year. And so we have a fixed water sign in that dark Halloween part of the year, because Halloween always occurs when the sun's in Scorpio. Because I mean, what happens is that almost every single, or maybe every single cultural celebration, folk habit, every single religion responds to what these underlying spiritual principles of the year are about. So of course in Halloween, there's such a sense of death. Scorpio is the sign of sexuality, but it's also a sign of death. Those are things specifically associated with that sign. So the dead come and visit, and people get dressed up in costumes and protect themselves from this scary time of year by making it fun. So fixed water is holding on to what I feel. There's almost a fighting of death in that sign. I feel a certain something. I'm not letting go of it. I'm not letting myself be destroyed by this darkness in this year, at this time of year. So there's the matter is almost reacting to the fact that the life force is disappearing. And this is why the M has the arrow pointing outwards. I'm fighting against the darkness. I'm fighting against the loss of my ego and the loss of life. I'm not going down. I'm not going down quietly. That's Scorpio's motto.